and they collect the eggs, grow on the caterpillars, and deliver them to Astley. So that is the plan. I just try and help out in any way I can, and probably do a lot of the survey work and the number crunching, which everybody else is just incredibly busy. As Gary hinted, acquiring a lot of land, which is very, very exciting. So there we go. So I've got 40 minutes, I believe. So I'm going to have a quick run through a load of stuff and show you a load of pictures. Large heath butterfly, otherwise known as the Manchester Argus, which is the name it was first given in this country when it was first discovered, which was probably on Chatmoss, although it's all we really know is in the Manchester area. It's a peatland specialist, so really the story is all about the biology of peatlands and the importance of peatlands. I'm going to probably have a little bit of a diversion into what's going on with peatland restoration in the area, because that's what has made the habitat possible for the large heath to come back, the Manchester Argus to return to Manchester, and quite exciting times. There's a lot of land acquisition schemes going on at the moment, and there's certainly potential to link up Astley Moss and Little Walden either with stepping stones or possibly the entire strip of land bar Stevenson's Railway, which runs straight through the middle of all this. Talk about the reintroduction and then show you some pictures of other fabulous insects that are doing well on the peatland sites. So I did an MSc over 2 years, which finished probably about 2 years ago now, and I've now embarked on a PhD, which has got off to a flying start with all the COVID, obviously, and the university, well, virtually shut down and still struggling to recover. So my MSc project was based around the large heath, the objectives being to support the 2020 reintroduction. Lots of work has been done on large heath. Qualitatively, it's reasonably well worked out what it needs, but not quantitatively how much of it do you need. So if you're starting from a bare peat site or a site such as Astley Moss, which was cut for peat for decades, and then after World War II was burned every year or two in order to stop scrub developing on it, it's cleared off everything except the millennia, all the mossland specialists, all of the dwarf shrubs, all of the sphagnum has gone. So you're working from a very, very low base. And the question is, at what stage have you got enough? When is enough sufficient? And that's not really known. So biology of the large heath, the nectar plant is Erica tetralix, cross-leaved heath. And there's some debate about how important that is. The adult is fairly short-lived. It usually gets predated within a couple of weeks in the wild, or even less than a week. It'll live about 3 weeks in captivity. This butterfly, as you see, it's had the back end of its lower wing pecked out. That's probably an attack by a meadow pipit, which is the species' main predator. And this poor fellow was really shot up. Usually they're very, very aware of movement in their vicinity, and they get away from you. And this guy was just hopping in between inflorescences and nectaring furiously, and obviously had a desperate need to top up his strength and resources, which meant he hung around long enough for me to get some nice pictures. Quite important. It probably answers to us the question about, how important is the cross-leaved heath to the butterfly. Larval food plant is hare's tail cotton grass, which is a clump-forming sedge. and produces all this absolutely beautiful bog cotton, which is a very important resource. The eggs get laid in the dry leaf litter at the bottom of the tussock. And if the bog floods, which bogs are tempted to do over the winter, you can see that this area, there's bits of bare peat that are going to be underwater in the middle of winter. This would have been taken in May with the hare's tail in full flower. And the caterpillars, they're able to survive submersion, but if it's warm enough and they can move, they'll climb up inside the tussock and get out of the water. So the tussock is a very important resource. That's why it's called hare's tail cotton grass. You've got these lovely cotton tails, and a seed in the middle of each little spider of cotton. So there's our research question. You've got bare peat with a plug plant of cross-leaved heath and a plug plant of hare's tail cotton grass planted adjacent to each other. They've probably been in the ground for a year, those, looking at the size of them. But how much cover on the bare peat do you require? At what time can you stop planting plug plants? And they're A, expensive, but B, they're in short supply. There's so much peatland restoration going on now that there's a waiting list to get hold of the cross-leaved heath, which has to be propagated from a cutting or micropropagated. The cotton grasses grow from seed, and so they can readily be propagated, and they're much quicker growing. So, as has been said already, there's an area of mosslands around in between Manchester and Liverpool, which are the remnants of chat moss, which would have been about, can you see the mouse moving there, Phil? Is the mouse moving? Yeah. So it was about 40 square miles, chat moss, back in the 1700s, absolutely impenetrable wilderness, just couldn't get into it. The surface of the bog about 30 feet above what is currently farmers' fields. So you've got 30 feet of semi-liquid peat, and it would be very, very dangerous to get in there. And then the River Glaze is the western edge of chat moss, but then you're straight into Holcroft moss, Risley moss, and then mosslands down the Mersey. So this whole area, and probably the whole coastal plain, would have been mossland before the age of man. A fascinating thing to speculate about nowadays is what would the effect of beaver have been on all that low-lying land, where every stream and brook would have had beaver dams in it, and then you're going to get sphagnum and peat building up on the edge of the beaver lakes. So, I mean, it makes the hair on the back of my neck tingle to try and imagine what that would have been like 1,000 years ago, 4,000 years ago. A very, very nice little article written by one of the current trainees on the Mossland project, where about the early settlement on chat moss, and the word Woolden, it comes from a Norse word, which is something like Vuelvedine, which means Wolf Valley. So what is now the Glaze Valley with horses and sheep probably would have been an area in between the peat domes where herds could actually move through, and the wolves would follow the herds back in the Dark Ages. So that makes you get interested, or makes me get interested. So you've got all those absent sites, which are our own. Winmarley, just up towards Lancaster, that's a Lancashire Wildlife Trust site with 2 areas with large heath on, separated by about 1 kilometre of Millennia tussock, which, I mean, since we were up there surveying, Mike has had a huge contract on there, bunding the Millennia area and just literally ploughing it and churning up all the tussock to make space to put sphagnum moss plugs into the exposed peat. Haitian moss, just right near Lancaster, that had a successful reintroduction in 2014, and that's persisted. And then Falshore and Meathop moss on Morecambe Bay, really nice Cumbria Wildlife Trust sites. And then going down south, Fens, Wixall, Wem moss and Chartley moss, which are a nice contrast. That's Meathorpe in March. It was absolutely freezing. Alpha fell in the background and horizontal frozen rain by the end of the afternoon. So it was quite good fun doing the surveying. We did 10 survey quadrats on each site. This is a typical good quality moss with loads of dwarf shrubs. You've got bog cranberries, the red spots, the red dots, which you can eat. They're a bit bitter. Cross-leaved heath and very small dwarf heather. Very low nutrient environment, so nothing's growing very big. The stringy stuff is hair's-tail cotton grass, which is very out of season at the moment. It was in March when this was taken, and then bits of sphagnum and polytric and moss and what have you. As a contrast, this is Little Woolden Moss, which is just near the reintroduction site. So it's on the edge of Salford, huge site. It's about 115 hectares, and it was mechanically peat extracted. So it was stripped down to the bare bones. There's on average half a metre of peat left. An extensive array of these peat dams has been put in. It's now about 28 kilometres of dams have gone in. So they're only a foot or so high, but just create a series of terraces like rice paddies and hold back the water. Common cotton grass, a really good colonizer. And you've got, there's a bit of a ridge just there, and that's actually the railway embankment. That's Stevenson's Railway. And then the other side of that is Astley, which was the reintroduction site. Just stepping forward onto the bog restoration, this I've marked where the quadrat eventually went. So this is the scene that we have. Lots of open water, peat bunds that are very vulnerable to erosion, and bare peat, but with big clumps of cotton grass of hare's tail growing up and lots of little seedlings coming up, which is encouraging. So that's exactly the same scene 2 years later. Absolutely masses of seed resource being produced. Confluent cotton grass, the bund near us and the bund further away, completely buried in cotton grass now. You'll see the open water space has closed up and there's a green film on it, which is Sphagnum cuspidatum, which is aquatic. It floats like a waterweed, and it's a really, really good colonizer for us. It's probably one of the major drivers so far, and I think in the next 10, 20 years will continue to be, because these floating mats, they increase the albedo of the mossland. Instead of it being black peat that just absorbs heat, it reflects more, and they stop evaporation of water, so they hold water onto the site, and the mat will build up until eventually you can walk over it. But that'll be decades in future, but you can see that time it will arrive. It'll come. This was the bottom line from the research. We did lots of stats and pinned down exactly what habitat resources the butterfly requires, which agreed with previous research. It's Erica tetralix, percentage cover, hare's tail cotton grass, Eriophorum vaginatum, percentage cover, and also the number of tussocks and the depth of the tussock. So from the top of the leaf tip down to the dry leaf litter at the bottom of the tussock, which can be surprisingly difficult to pin down, because if you've got liquid peat blending into sphagnum moss and blending into the tussock, it's a little tricky to be sure about that one. We've got dose response curves here. So on the y-axis, the probability of presence of the butterfly going from 0 to 1, and then the resource abundance on the x-axis. You don't get a full sigmoidal curve, because that goes off it's going into sort of theoretical territory, but you get a curve. You can find a 50% point, which gives you an estimate of when the how much habitat resource you need for about a 50-50 chance of maintaining a butterfly population. And then the top of the curve, people arbitrarily take 75% or 90%. We use a statistical method to work out the break-of slope. And from that, you can work out how many tussocks you need. So what percentage cover of your plants and how big the tussocks have to be. So it works at about 4 tussocks per square metre. They're going to be 20 to 30 centimetres across and about 14 centimetres deep, and 10 or 12% of Ericotetralix. So that's quite a useful result. We're not quite sure yet. I think I'll have to do a lot more thinking about the stats and probably get some more data, how to actually combine these, how to put them into one metric. But we just added them up and then reran the regression curve, and that's plotted out all the different sites that we've got. There's a site at the bottom here, which was very sad to visit. It's just drying out and the large heath population is dwindling. And there was a lot of dead cross-leaved heath. It just wasn't surviving. However, you've got Winmarleigh right at the top. I think that was the best site, and Fens and Wixall was the next best. Astley looking pretty decent, and that was eventually the site for the reintroduction. Okay. I shall get a move on. Peatland conservation. Keystone species, Sphagnum moss, which is a remarkable plant. Its metabolism works that about a third of all the carbon that it fixes through photosynthesis ends up in this weird molecule, sphagnum acid, which is, if you remember your chemistry, it's got phenol acid radical groups and acetic acid type groups. It just makes acid, and that makes the whole environment very inhospitable for other plants. And it makes the sphagnum moss inedible and indigestible. There are no insects that feed off it. The sheep don't graze it. It locks up nutrients so that other plants can't get them. So it's producing a bog environment. And it's actually antimicrobial. It stops fungal breakdown and bacterial breakdown. And I mean, number B is it's a red pigment. It's why the sphagnum picture was red, very similar to the pigment in beetroot. And then sugar acids, which is number C. So the plant is making these really unpleasant molecules, which make it means when carbon goes into sphagnum moss, it stays there for millennia. It's locked away forever. All these compounds, they're tannins, they bind onto fat and protein and preserve anything that falls in the bog. This is the famous Lindau man, who is now in the British Museum. I went and paid my respects to him last month when I was down in London, and we were doing galleries and museums. So really quite a remarkable thing. As you're probably aware, peatland has become really quite a matter of great interest in terms of carbon sequestration for moderating global warming. And as we're in the lead up to COP26, this is really, really important. Everyone talks about energy and fossil fuels, but agricultural land use is hugely important, and peatland is high up on the list. So this organisation Drawdown, they look at all the different currently best proven technologies that are there for global warming. Onshore wind right at the top, photovoltaics, but then lots of other surprising things. Health and education, educating women and girls comes very high up. Improved clean cooking stoves for developing countries. Peatland protection and restoration, number 12, and the list, this is a list of 100, it goes on and on. So yeah, peatland is right at the top with a realistic potential to sequester 42 gigatons of carbon. So that's good. They do a couple of graphics. So the size of the circle represents how much carbon is you can potentially save. And what's interesting to us is ecosystem protection, rewilding. George Monbiot and Chris Packham on about this constantly, turning land over to nature, getting plants to grow, put down roots, store carbon in the soil, agricultural practices to do the same, and protecting and restoring ecosystems, which is what we're talking about, an absolutely huge area. As Al Gore said, this isn't a silver bullet, it's silver buckshot. So there are many, many threads to the story, but what we're into is important. So, a slightly different way of looking at the data. It's really showing you've got a flux going through the atmosphere, greenhouse gases coming out of agricultural land, cows, ploughed fields, and so on. And then the carbon being sunk back into the ground and into the oceans. Two things we need to do. One is reduce the release, and two, increase the take up of carbon dioxide. The aim being you're going to push down the amount of CO2 remaining in the atmosphere. So currently about 60% of all the greenhouse gases emitted stay up there in the atmosphere. And the reason they call the project Drawdown is it's looking to saying what can we do and should we do that by 2050, by mid-century, we can actually be not just stopping CO2 going up, but pulling it down, below the 350 threshold. So doing our bit. This is Little Walden Moss, so peat extraction site, and this is how it's just greened up over the last 4 or 5 years, and it's probably one of the better bits of it, but not the best by any means. There's people doing greenhouse gas monitoring on these mosslands, and this process with this first flush of cotton grass, they reckon it's pulling in about 35 tons of CO2 per year per hectare, and that's going down into roots which are in old peat with a pH of about 3.5. They're never going to rot. All that carbon from that grass and that rhizome is in the ground, and the next stage will be getting sphagnum moss growing everywhere as well. There's some, they're called NDVIs, these images which are processed from satellite images. That's from Landsat, the NASA satellites, and you can just see how a slow start, and then over the last 3 years the amount of greenery really has increased dramatically and statistically significantly. The arrow on the 2018 image, that's more or less the perspective of the last series of slides that I just showed. So if you look at it on the 2021, it's looking out over an area which is actually only average. There's areas that have got a lot more green cover than that. The reintroduction. As Phil said, Chat Moss was a huge wasteland. Daniel Defoe was obviously a novelist and a writer of the early 1700s, and he did a tour of Great Britain and wrote lots of memoirs, described Chat Moss. That's one of the earliest descriptions. And then a chap called Lewin, who was a famous illustrator and printer. So he did the first sort of colour nature illustration book back in 1795 and reports the Manchester Argus with a nice quote about a description. I don't think I can better that. Stephenson's rocket, really the first major attempt to industrialise the mosslands, a lot of money being put into cutting into and draining the moss, and the rest is history, as they say. And we're now post-industrial revolution and into an age of restoration. So tons of restoration work going on, young people and old people planting things, growing plants, This is the team from Princess Park Garden Centre in Earlham. And this is the butterfly chrysalises as they arrive on the moss from Chester Zoo. So a load of little alien pods hung up on bamboos. And they brought them down to the moss when they thought they were just about to start to emerge. We had them stored in this release tent, and you'd see common lizard climbing all over the tent trying to get in. So you needed a good zip on the tent. There's a chrysalis just about to emerge. And that's a butterfly just drying off its wings. And they're ready to fly in less than an hour after they come out. So there's the Wildlife Trust people going down every morning. I was going down every afternoon and releasing any butterflies. I was collecting chrysalis cases. There's the current Manchester Argus and one of Lewin's 200-year-old illustrations. I love the way you've got the double eye spot at the anal corner of the back wing, just like on the 200-year-old illustration, which is just wonderful. Oops. So there's one of the releases on cross-leaved heath. Quite spooky. They know that you're there. They seem to like being on the ground. They know they're going to get predated by the meadow pipit if they fly. So they stick on the ground, but they turn to face you, and presumably to reduce their profile. Just of interest, you can see all the sticky hairs on the cross-leaved heath. And Charles Darwin got very interested in this plant, wondering whether it was actually evolving into becoming an insectivorous plant, although he wasn't able to prove that, and nobody else has looked into it since. So there we go. That was my data from last year. So for the first 3 weeks, the butterfly remained on the first cotton grass bed, just right close to the release tent, within 30 meters, 50 meters. By the 4th week of the season, moved a little bit further away. This year we have got large heath. They've come back and they're getting out maybe another 30 to 50 meters. But so they're quite colonial. They stay together. That's the slide you've seen before, which is pretty special. And that was one of the first ones that I spotted this year. So beautifully camouflaged in the Millennia hay. So that's pretty good. Certainly the first time in 150 years that they've been on chat moss. I think Phil mentioned about maybe the 1930s a record. Was that Carrington Moss? We'll come back to that. Right, time to shut up. Just a few quick.
Sorry, no, I hadn't looked up exactly when and where it was. It was a while ago that I came across this report.
Yeah, I think it's on the records. So loads of other butterflies and bumblebees around. Spiders do very well. Rich Birkmar did a spider survey on all of these mosslands, and quite a few rare species and quite a few firsts. This is obviously a common species, but I sent that to Rich and he comes back saying it's actually the first time it's been recorded on the mosslands. So put that on iRecord. So what's a garden spider doing on cotton grass above open water? But there's plenty, they're clearly getting plenty of food, lots of flies, as Phil was saying, and Rich was getting lots of springtails out when he hoovers the undergrowth, just his tray absolutely full of springtails, and loads and loads of breeding waders now, obviously, finding plenty to eat and plenty to raise young with. So loads of nice stuff. This is probably my favorite picture of the year. I was just planting a sedge called white-beaked sedge. So we got some plug plants in. So it likes to be in floating sphagnum. So I was pottering around and there he was. We'd seen a clutch of Vaporomorph eggs last year just whilst doing scrub clearance, so it's obviously doing quite well on the site. This chap just on a cold day just sat there. Let me take pictures. Rare plants as well, common sundew, but there's some greater sundew and some oblong leaf sundew being introduced now. Josh Wright very much taking a lead on that side of things. And this is one of Josh's things, the lesser bladderwort, which is in the ditch just adjacent to the large heath area. There's a fire ditch which is still open, and this has spread like mad, and just at the same time the large heath is flying, the ditch is full of these wonderful little delicate yellow flowers. And those are good publicity for the Wildlife Trust. So they've got the story in The Guardian, BBC News, Northwest Tonight. That's one of my picks on Northwest Tonight. There you go. Just while talking, it's just a little bit of video of one of the releases. So that's from last year.
Right.
Which is just wonderful.
Well done.
Oh, right, said enough.
You've taken us from global warming and measures to combat it to relating all that to our local insect projects in a masterful fashion. I mean, I spent quite a bit of time myself on Little Walden Moss. I mean, not for the last couple of years for various reasons, but have planted some of the plants there. And I did go around in the spring of this year, and the increase in cotton grasses was remarkable. Though, as you say, the sphagnum only seems to be starting in some of the pools, Sphagnum cuspidatum.
Yes.
But can you tell us more about the biology of the large heath itself? I believe it is a worldwide spread in the upper latitudes.
Yes, all the way around the subarctic region. Tim Melling did his PhD on this and sort of dug through the literature and reckoned there was 31 described subspecies. One of them, have I got the mic at the moment, Phil? Not highlighted, but
Gary is the controller of it all. We can hear you, yes.
Okay, yeah. So 30 odd subspecies. How they relate genetically hasn't been looked at to a great extent. There's one of the Canadian subspecies which some genetic work was done on, and it got reclassified as a separate species. That's an interesting one. It actually lives on salt marsh. So you've got this caterpillar that's capable of surviving inundation in salt water, which is pretty remarkable for a caterpillar. But that's found its own species now. There's 3 UK subspecies described. So that the lowland English one, which is the one we've got here, which is the most threatened because all of the lowland raised bog has been destroyed. There's upland England, so Northumbria and Wales, and then there's a Scotica variety, which is really north of the Highland boundary fault, northern part of the Highlands. How closely or not they are related genetically isn't known, and whether they'd. I mean, there's an idea that possibly the very northern Scottish subspecies would have migrated back to Ireland as a glacial refugia. So there's large heath in Ireland. So possibly Scotica could be related to the Irish subspecies, and the English subspecies might be related to the European. But that's a matter of conjecture at the moment.
I'm a bit bemused. I've just had a crane fly handed in, which has been flying around our house. I can't really tell what it is. It's not a very big, it's a sort of medium-sized one. It's probably a winter gnat, actually. A quick look at the general appearance, but don't quote me on that. Sorry?
Who passed that to you?
Oh, my wife, Elspeth here is, she's not listening in, but she's probably been busy in the kitchen and noticed this creature coming in.
It was it was interesting, Phil, you talking about all the cotton grass which is coming back to Little Walden Moss. Is that connected physically to RHS Bridgewater? They're turning a little section of their new garden back into Chat Moss condition.
Yes.
Victoria Meadow, is it?
Hmm.
And knew of that. It's probably only 2 to 3 kilometers away from Astley Moss, as the crow flies.
Mm-hmm.
And so it's on the edge of Chat Moss area of the deep peat.
It used to be Chat Moss, yeah.
Yes, yeah. So much of the peat has been cut away, and a lot of the land has been very heavily fertilized, which makes it almost impossible to turn back into bog, because you just get brambles and nettles.
Right.
So yeah, very difficult. I mean, these new bits of land that are being acquired, sort of dilemmas, I suppose, as to whether to strip off the top layers of peat. If so, where do you put them? Where do you put the peat? You can't really sell it. And yet you've somehow got to drop that nutrient level. I don't know whether anyone's thought of that very much.
Well, I would think they have, RHS, but how are they going to just leave it to go back to regress?
Yeah, what you could do, I suppose, is just have meadow acid grassland on it and keep on taking the sward off. And over 10 years, that's going to drop the nutrient level significantly. And then cotton grass very avidly seeks out nutrient and locks it up in the root, in the rhizome. So if you can get some cotton grass to grow, that ought to start to convert everything into suitable conditions. The problem is you'll tend to find that soft rush becomes highly invasive, just takes over, and you just have this horrible mass of spiky, 3 foot high bushes,
right?
Which is very, very hard to do anything with. The farms on the uplands get it. They try fertilizing their shallow peat, and it just gets infested with soft rush, which nothing will eat, so nothing will graze it. And at that point, they're almost stuck, because it stops the grass growing, but at the same time is inedible. It's just so tough.
It'll be interesting.
It's interesting. It's challenging for sure. It can be done, and people, where there's a will, there's a way.
Yeah, my little observer's book of British butterflies, which I've had for decades, it talks about the larva really feeding on various kinds of meadow grass as well.
Yeah, it's not been hugely observed.
No.
It'll be good. I mean, if a good population gets established, there's purple moorgrass in huge amounts, obviously, and it has been seen feeding, resting on it and ovipositing on it. It certainly likes to rest on it. I've got some lovely bits of video which I'll just try and dig out and stick on the screen of the butterfly just hanging out on purple moorgrass. the there's other butterfly species, 3 or 4 other butterflies which will use purple moorgrass, and they're certainly benefiting from the nectar resource produced by the all of the crossleaf heath plug plants that have been put in, which will only get more and more. They'll spread into clumps several feet across.
Yes.
And they just spread and take root and carry on spreading. And interestingly, if you get sphagnum moss growing amongst the clumps, the sphagnum grows up and the crossleaf heath grows up to stay out of the sphagnum, puts out roots into the sphagnum, and it becomes immortal. It just never tires because it's always rerouting itself. So yeah, there's something good that has been started there. White-beak sedge is a pot that I mentioned is a possible food plant. The common cotton grass, a possible food plant. Or certainly other sedges. So there's a German called Viking who's published, and sedges is in these sort of in wet acid grassland is what it really seems to go for. So that'll be interesting to see. If it does go for the millennia, that's fantastic because there's so much of it on Astley. It'll really help the species.
And the other Manchester mosses. Come back to the large heath. You did say so how closely, well, how little it disperses from its birthplace. So that does seem really a sort of not very kind of good survival approach. I mean, if a fertilized female does get carried, perhaps by the wind in a gale further away to favorable habitat, is it likely to start a new colony?
Well, you'd hope so. The people that are going up to Winmarleigh, they're saying the females seem to virtually fly not at all. Yeah, if you see one flying, it's probably a male, and the females will, they just stick in the undergrowth, usually lay the first clutch of eggs before they ever fly.
Because that's a curious thing about various insects do have 1 or 2 moths, virtually wingless females. There are some crane flies like that. And I think Darwin had some theory about flightless insects, but that was more to do with not being blown off islands. So
yeah, well, you've kind of got islands here. It's so specific with its habitat, and both the larval food plant and the nectar plant are in the same place, which is slightly unusual almost. So it probably works for it very well to basically stay. If it's if it survived to be an adult, it's in a pretty good place to lay eggs and probably don't try to move. I think what we saw from the the slide where I was tracking and GPSing where I was sighting butterflies, they stuck close. Presumably it's driven by pheromones. I don't know. So males and females staying close together, presumably at a stage where they've laid a lot of eggs in one area, they then start to move out from that area and take the risk of actually moving, given that the chance of being picked off by a meadow pipit as soon as you take to the air is significant. Movement is a risk. Males have been spotted, or butterflies have been spotted 1 kilometre or a mile away from the mossland, by on very rare occasions when people are going to a mossland and to look for large heath and then they see one, which means it could potentially make the jump from Astley to Little Woolden, and there's now two small patches of mossland being acquired in between the two, and
yes, heard about that.
Potentially a lot more land yet. So one of those patches, it's called Rindle Moss. So you'll see it, National Wildlife Trust publishing it, but it's been cut over but not been damaged in decades. So you've got a lot of nice sphagnum there. No cross-leaved heath, but quite a lot of hairtail tussock. So, and they've only just acquired it, but it's surrounded by birchwood. So the formula will be to clear out most of the birch, put bunding around it to maintain the water level throughout the summer. And then I'm sure there'll be a few thousand plug plants will get put in of the cross-leaved heath, so that when the population actually is large enough and tries to migrate, it'll find a nectar resource waiting for it, and could probably colonize brindle wood, brindle moss, and then from there it's only 500 meters to the best bit of Little Walden.
When, not if, the population gets big enough. You sound quite confident.
Yeah,
but how so accurately, or can one monitor the population from year to year? I mean, given the resources available.
Well, I'm doing my PhD part-time, so my intention is to be around and be able to do the monitoring over the next 3 to 4 years. So I'm going down there daily. In theory, one of the Wildlife Trust officers would do the transect once a week. So it's getting a lot more intensive monitoring off me than the Wildlife Trust have got the time to put into it. I guess you'll get good years and bad years. Quantitatively, there wasn't as much butterfly flying this year as there was from the 50-odd chrysalis cases that produced butterflies last year.
Is that weather around the
Yeah.
flight time?
Yeah, the flight time was about 3 weeks late, and then I'd done the habitat survey during May, thinking, well, at least I'll be on the site every day, and then as soon as I see butterflies flying, I'll stop doing habitat and do monitoring and following butterflies around, see where they get to. And that didn't happen till really the last day of doing the habitat survey. I was there just tidying up, just doing, checking a few GPS positions and so on. And May was freezing. I was getting really cold just doing quad rats during May. It was ridiculous. And then I was there mid-June. I think it was about the 15th of June, and it was the hottest day of the year at the time. And I counted 15 large heath in flight that day and got that photo that I showed you. But they dispersed quite rapidly. And after that was just seeing 2, 3, 8, 0, depending really on the ambient temperature of the day. The weather very volatile, and you can have a pretty good idea of what it's going to be like just from the temperature.
Phil mentioned that the butterfly can be international all around the northern hemisphere, really.
Yes.
Where are they most common? Are they common more on the highland mosses, like in Scotland?
I think they need a good moss, and they need some temperature. So, for example, there's very, very good mosslands in Northumbria, maybe at about 1,500 feet altitude, and they haven't got large heath on them because it's probably too cold. And that was Roger Dennis, that you probably know. He was an author of that paper.
Know of.
Yeah, so he was curator at Manchester Museum at one point. And
my little book talks about them occurring up to 2,000 feet in Scotland.
Really, that is interesting.
Whether it's true or not, I mean,
I'm sure it is true, but obviously colder in Scotland than Northumbria.
Yeah.
I'm sure. I mean, they're in Austria, for example. They're near Hamburg, so there must be altitude there.
I remember someone telling me about being to Finland and telling me it's a very common butterfly there, and it goes very far north, Finland.
Yeah.
And it's just everywhere.
Yeah.
So it
Which
must
is
be,
more lowland, isn't it?
yeah, but
Yes.
obviously,
And obviously, I mean, Finland and Estonia is where most of the peat that's being sold in garden centres nowadays is coming from. So yeah, they've got lots of mossland, they've got lots of suitable habitat. And it's right the way around, through into, I mean, Denmark, Northern Europe, North Germany, Poland,
Ireland, yeah.
Siberia, Ireland, Canada, Alaska. So it's around. Certainly butterflies that look very much like this. So how much genetic similarity or dissimilarity there is is a matter for debate.
It's going to be interesting if they're not very mobile, whether it was when Eurasia existed and before the Atlantic split open.
Yeah. Or, I mean, the Bering Land Bridge is often certainly in the middle ice ages, it becomes dry land, doesn't it? Although, gosh, it'd be hard to believe that that a butterfly could manage to cross the Bering Land Bridge in the middle of an ice age. Hardy mammals, and they've gone to and fro. Wolves, camels. So camelids are an North American species originally that then went into South America and became llamas, and across the Arctic and became Bactrian camels and desert camels here, or this side of the Atlantic. It's all just amazing stuff, isn't it? That happens in deep time that is very difficult to conceptualize.
what about its parasites in relation to the reintroduction?
I was going to just ask that.
There's comments in the literature that you tend to get relatively modest populations, and the populations never get huge. So presuming that either they're getting parasitized if they become too abundant a food source, or they deliberately migrate. Once they get to a certain density, they move, which is the kind of behavior that we're observing in our reintroduction population, that they stick together until and then they start migrating. I say this year, presumably the adults from the larvae from the eggs that have been laid around the release tent, which is where for the first 3 weeks all the butterflies were congregating. On the first day that they appeared, let's say 15 in one day, the most I saw in that area around the release tent, and then they dissipated, and they were gone. And then was finding them pretty much scattered evenly across the whole area and beyond last year's perimeter, last year's footprint.
Do you know if there's any species specific parasites though that will only go for that? Only go for large.
I've never seen a reference to it.
Okay.
Gosh, you'd want a specimen, I suppose, if I ever found. Would it be on a caterpillar or an adult, do you think, that you'd find a?
It's usually breeding caterpillars, or that's one of the ways that people rear caterpillars and then get tachinid flies emerging instead of the butterflies or moths.
Especially if they have such a short life as imagoes.
I suppose I ought to know more about it, really. I don't know how specific to species tachinid flies are, and I suppose perhaps one should sort of look for tachinids specifically associated with the mosslands. I did do quite a lot of surveying on the Astley moss and Holcroft moss and Little Walden moss a few years ago, and the big problem is that you do get lots of if you like, general widespread flies, large numbers of those, and the peatland specialists, even on the peatlands, they were relatively scarce. So
Yeah.
and I got quite different selections on Astley moss compared to Holcroft moss a few kilometres away. Now, whether this is just because you have to do lots more sampling to get a realistic sample. Obviously, lots of those were short life probably coming out. So it's
You've got very
there's
small
scope
habitat
for
patches as well.
infinite scope for more invertebrate surveys on the mosses, and perhaps understanding how some of the species relate to one another.
Yeah. Yeah, I'm sure there will be a parasitoid. There always is, isn't there? Nature always
And
finds
then
a way.
then there's the ichneumon, the Hymenoptera parasitoids, which I don't know anything at all about.
You could see, I think, if it's something like a braconid, one of the smaller groups in the Parasitica, you'd probably see cocoons on the caterpillar, lots of cocoons coming out of the caterpillar. But some of the bigger ichneumonids will just be one, and it depends if they're ecto or endo, if they're living inside the caterpillar, or whether they've got very different. Well, Gavin Broad gave us a very interesting talk in the last series of these, and but if you did see anything on one of the caterpillars, then it would be
Get into a jar.
But it's probably quite unlikely, because they're not going to be very obvious.
The caterpillars are they're rarely seen, very rarely. So it would be a really idiosyncratic, it would be a really random thing if you happen to see one of these, but one might.
I did find a very rare tachnid fly Astley moss in the middle of it once, which it had been recorded in Scotland and somewhere in the south of England. And I did send a specimen to the National Recording Scheme at the Natural History Museum, who said, "So thank you very, very much," and confirmed it. But that was just the moss it was known to be associated with on quite common range of trees, willows and other trees. So that's not a sort of sinister sign. I did find more than one specimen of it. It's grapho something, Gaster.
I wonder if I could just put a picture up on the screen, which is it's a photograph by Dave Steele, who is primarily a bird recorder, although he's got very, very interested in does the dragonflies on Little Walden as well. So we're doing a write-up for the 10-year anniversary of Little Walden.
Yes, it will be 2012. That was when it was for sports, isn't it?
Yeah. So that's a yellowhammer, and it's feeding on willow. But would those be sawfly larvae that it's got?
The one at the top certainly is. The one with its...
Well, there is a slightly smaller one. They all look the same to me.
Yeah. So, and sawfly is what you seem to get on willow.
Yeah, well, there's quite lots of leaf hoppers. I think there's quite a lot of unusual leaf hoppers associated with moss, peatland and bog plants, and I don't think they've been surveyed on the Manchester mosses, so that might be something to aim at next year.
Yeah. So was it Gary that was saying the top one?
That is. You can sort of see the head just about, and
Get my magnifying glass out to see that.
Yeah. I don't know why, but I just
full screen here.
I just know that's a sawfly just from the, I don't know.
The jizz, that's the word, isn't it?
Yeah.
Well done. We'll take
The
it.
rest I'm not sure.
We'll trust you on that.
Good. Thank you for that. Right. So, right, likely sawfly then. Oh.
I hope the yellowhammers are doing well. I used to see those on Horcroft Moss when I was going there more often.
Yeah. I mean, it's the big success with Little Walden is the waders. Just astronomical. I'm not particularly a birder myself, but it is just delightful.
I think when I was there in the spring, I think I did hear a curlew. I might be imagining it and confused, but have been mentioned. And
they're usually 2 or 3 pairs, and they certainly breed every year. Often the nests get lost, but they have fledged curlew. There's one amazing occasion we were just doing a guided walk, and there was a curlew sort of distracting us and flying, within yards of us, and just doing daft things to attract our attention. And somebody, knowing what to do, turned their telescope behind us and spotted the young. So one parent is distracting the people while the other parent is getting the young out of the way.
Well, crane fly is an important time to be wrapping proceedings up with, I guess, if I'm still in charge. And for anyone who isn't already aware, your opportunity to get into understanding crane flies ever since I joined the Dipterus Forum, which was just over 10 years ago. The book by Alan Stubbs on British crane flies is going to be published in the next year, and year after year went by. But I'm actually staggered that this year it has actually appeared just a few months ago, full of keys and ecological information about all the species. And certainly there's several species of the uplands that's been found in the past to be very important for the wader populations. I think Galton plovers largely survive on them. It was fine. So that's available from the British, the BENHS, we call it on their website. And there will be introductory webinars and seminars at the workshop of the Dipterus Forum at Preston Montfort in February is due to be with Pete Boardman on crane flies. And what else is happening? Well, just look out. I'm sure you can find these events if you are interested, much or better than I can remember them. So I think we'll say thanks to Andrew, and we, Gary wants to say something.
Oh yeah, just while we're here, can I just mention a few Teniptra workshops coming up, because we're returning to the World Museum for the first time, I think, since February last year.
Oh.
And so on just quickly, so on Friday, we have this Friday, 22nd of October, we have Making and Keeping a Diptera collection with Nigel Jones. And then 30th of October, Muddy Spiders with Richard Gallen. And then 13th of November, Apion Weevils with Mark Gurney. 17th of November, we have Sawflies. And then Hoverflies on 19th, 26th of November, Ants. So yeah, we've just got, there's quite a selection all the way up to the end of November for you to come back in and see the museum. And there's a couple of webinars as well going on.
So that's in the budget. Is it still a certain amount of social distancing with limited numbers, or more limited than, I mean, they were limited before because of the space, but are they more limited than they were?
Yes, we're limiting them to 10 participants, as we have yeah, we're limited. We have certain quotas for different rooms that we're allowed a number of people in. So yeah, but I think there's still the odd space available on those. So if you're interested, then please do come back into the museum and
they are only face to face, are they? They're not.
Those 6 I mentioned are face to face. Obviously, we've done lots of webinars. I think there's more than 40 videos you can watch on the YouTube channel. Many hours of footage there that you can listen to and watch. On the 25th of November, we have another webinar. That's adult Caddis with because the new book.
Yes, with our own Ian Wallace.
Yeah.
So that's centered around that. And then the 2nd of December, Grasshoppers and Crickets, with Bjorn Beckman from the Biological Record Centre. So
yes, well, that should be interesting. Because I mean, Lancashire and Cheshire, I think I've seen quite a few additions to its list of I'm not quite sure if we're really in control of the list of Orthoptera yet. But for instance, I mean, Phil Smith reported was it the large cone head on Highfield moss that Andrew mentioned earlier? And there's been Roessler's bush cricket was mentioned at Caddis head moss, I think. And
that's
spreading.
I'm not sure if we've I don't know if there's anyone in charge of Orthoptera in Lancashire and Cheshire at the moment, but
There was Andy Hankinson was taking an interest in bog bush cricket.
yes, well, he gave us a talk almost 2 or 3 years ago now, so I think we are due an update on that. I think that's on the possible. I think Mike Longdon has been approached if he can tell us about that later in this season of talks.
Andy's in Brazil, so but he is available for webinars.
The only county recorder I have listed for Orthoptera on the active recorders page of the Northwest Invertebrates website is Michael Foley, which is for North Lancashire, Vice County 60. And of course, he wrote a book, didn't he, for the Orthoptera of North Lancashire and South Cumbria. I've got it.
Did he? Well,
hold on a minute.
We need to.
There we go. I've got it on my bookshelf. There we go.
Can't really see anything on that. A bit sort of reflections of your screen.
Yeah, it's not a very good camera on this laptop, but it's
too shiny.
It's a little booklet. It's not a huge book, but it's a nice thing on there. So, but I don't. There's not many other active recorders I've got listed. John Dell, Phil Smith, and Alan Holmes. So I don't know many Orthoptera dedicated Orthoptera recorders in the region.
Oh dear, I should have. I mean, I do try to put them in if I'm not too busy with other things. I can identify a fair few. I mean, even there's a slender ground hopper which I put in records every time I get back from iRecord. Oh, it's out of its range around here, but it's literally everywhere that's anywhere damp in certainly in the earlier part of the year. It's quite a nice thing to find. So so that's another sort of thing to try to get together the Lancashire and Cheshire situation on Orthoptera. Right, has anyone else got any comments or questions about anything? Gary again?
Yeah, sorry, no, just while I was thinking of it, just a bit of a question to Keith, if he's still there. It seems to have camera's gone off, but it was just on tachinids, because I just remember, because we were mentioning it, Dick Loxton gave a talk at the Northern Coleopterists meeting a few years ago, and he was dissecting a certain carabid, I think, and he could tell whether they were parasitized by this certain tachinid, and he was looking at them for 2 habitats, where I think the tachinid was not present. It wasn't parasitizing it, and he was wondering whether there was two beetles going on, because it wasn't being parasitized in one habitat, and maybe the beetle was more than one beetle.
More
But
resistant.
could you remember any better, Keith?
I think I must have missed that talk, because I don't remember it. I mean, of course, his big stamping ground is on Anglesey, isn't it?
Yeah, it might have been
not
on
that far
Jean's system.
away.
No, no, that's very interesting. I think this event is making me very interested in parasitoids with beetles, but I really couldn't say.
Okay, I will ask Dick about it when I next see him.
Yeah,
And then I'll report back to.
but this was on adults, was it? Adult carabids.
Yeah.
All right.
They would emerge. Yeah. Well, tachinids are very complex taxonomically. I think there are certain groups which, I know some are associated with leaf beetles that I find quite often. There's certainly one on sort of heathery places like Little Budworth, or the mosses, that you get one which is presumably attacking the heather leaf beetle, Lochmere susurralis. Is that the one? That seems to be quite a sort of verb association. But the Tachinid Fly book issued by the RES, I don't think it has a sort of table of hosts genera, as far as I can make out. But like you, Keith, I think something we ought to think more about the connections between the different things we see.
Well, it's certainly been a main theme tonight. You say
Right.
Clidium, Gary, attack bark beetles.
Yes.
Well, that was a beetle attacking a bark beetle, wasn't it?
Yeah,
beetle
that's
on
right.
beetle.
Yeah, that's not not parasitizing, just eating the larvae of bark beetles, as I understand.
Oh, but externally rather than.
Yeah. That's.
I mean, it's
Well, externally, but within the tunnels.
Yeah.
In the wood, yes. But they
so
can't
a
get away.
predator rather than parasitoid.
Yeah.
It's of course, when you look into them, these sort of concepts merge into one another. You gradually discover as you get more involved in this.
Yes,
it's harpalus. They attack adult harpalus, Keith.
Oh, right.
Yeah.
Yes.
So presumably he was looking at rufopes or something. Anyway, sorry.
Probably, yes. But I'll read it up. Look it up and see.
Tribe Euphorieini, where the biology is known, species in this tribe are parasitoids of Coleoptera, laying incubated eggs directly on the host. The host larva, Chrysomelidae, Cassida references as hosts.
Tortoise
right.
beetles.
There's not a lot of information in this book, but I don't think there's an actual table of hosts against species, which is a bit.
Right.
There's probably some database somewhere about all this, but yes, there's certainly quite a few. One comes across that.
There's probably a chapter in the Coleopterist handbooks.
Oh, here we are. Frerea, genus Frerea hosts adult Coleoptera. Harpalus is mentioned, I think, which is what you just said, but I don't think I've ever come across genus Frerea.
How do you spell that?
Genus Frerea. F. Foxtrot, Romeo, Alpha, Echo, Alpha.
Okay. Well, thanks very much. I've got to go now. I promised I'd
Right.
be
Well, it's
there
our
for 9 o'clock.
official closing time. Yes.
Yeah, but thank you very much, Andrew, for
Yes.
that's fascinating. Okay, and see you next time. When is next time?
Well, it will be. I think I got the information. So I was rather seemed a bit last minute. I don't know why Justin couldn't come, but it would be the 3rd Tuesday in November. And
I think 16th will it be?
yes, last time I'm not. I did mention a few topics that were being lined up, but I may have missed the. If there is a final lineup, I'm afraid I missed it myself.
Yeah,
I think I'm the only member of the committee council. Sorry, here. Unless I think Gary might have got some.
I think that it might have been Olga Civil next time.
Oh, Olga on blowflies. Right. Well,
but I was also going to mention
blue bottles and green bottles. Again, there's a lot more to them than you would think at first sight.
And Phil, you mentioned Douglas Boys was lined up to do a talk this season.
I did.
Yeah, unfortunately, yeah, he passed away in the last few weeks. He was one of Justin's friends and a very young and prominent upcoming lepidopterist. So it's very sad news.
right. Thanks very much. I'll see you next time.
Somber note.
Well,
watch this space, I think, is the message. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.
And thank you especially to Andrew.
Thank you, Andrew. Enjoyed it.
Good.
Thank you very much, Andrew.
Thank you very much. Thanks for listening. Cheers.